The theme, the thesis of what I wanted to talk about today is that sometimes our bad experiences, our tough experiences, our suffering, our hardship are also God experiences. They're also the moments that God is most present and that we are most aware of what He is doing and how He is working in our lives. I know that we long for mountaintop experiences. I know that we long for the sense of freedom, for riding your bike with not holding onto the handlebars and just like life is free and good and everything's wonderful. But there's a lot of life that you're going to experience that is not that. And I want you to know that when life is not that, it doesn't mean that you can't have a deep experience of the presence of God. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're in a series called Bent, Not Broken. And I think this is one of the most profound and theologically rich passages in the New Testament. You don't even have to be a Christian to recognize the value of the prose that the author writes here. This is a guy named Paul the Apostle, and you can just tell he's thinking on another level. He's very, very philosophical in the way that he thinks and writes. And so just understand, as we jump in, understand that he is trying to communicate this profound truth that is not easy to communicate. It's 2 Corinthians 12, and we're going to start in verse 1. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 1. He says this, he starts it this way, this chapter this way. I must go on boasting. Now, clearly we're in the middle of something. What are you talking about? I must go on boasting. Paul isn't boasting something that Christians shouldn't do. And there's a whole backstory, and it would be fun to get into. But the short version is that he's just trying to defend the fact that he should have some say in their lives. Like that he can have some spiritual authority in their lives. And he's just trying to help them understand that it's okay for him to call out their stuff, even though he's just some guy. And he's trying to explain to them why. And he gives them this really interesting story. So dig in here. He goes, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I will go on. Now what he's saying is I'm gonna do a little boasting. And I'm going to do a little boasting about some experiences that I've had with God that should help you understand that I have a connection with God and that I have something valuable to say to you. Verse 2, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Okay, we're in weird territory. We'll come back to that in a second. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I don't know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I don't know, God knows. You're repeating yourself, Paul, but he's got a reason. Verse 4, was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. What is he talking about? What in the world is this? When you crack open your Bible and you come to passages like this and you're just like scratching your head, you're tempted to just like shut your Bible and be like, I'm going to scroll on TikTok because that makes way more sense than this does. What are you talking about, Paul? A friend of mine shared a story from his childhood, and let me preface what I'm about to tell you with the fact that most of you have some kind of story or experience like this. But he shared a story from his childhood where he was in the living room, just a kid, 8, 9 years old. He's laying on the floor watching TV, and his mom calls him from the kitchen. And you know when you're settled in and your parent wants you, you're like, it's an automatic frustration. And he's like, what? And his mom called him again. And he's like, okay, well, I'm going to be busted if I don't get up and go into the kitchen. So he gets up off the floor, goes into the kitchen. He's like, what, Mom? And his mom's like, what are you talking about? I didn't call you. And he's like, yes, you called me in here. Nope, I didn't. And just then, they heard this big crash come from the living room. And they run back into the living room to see, and this is wild to me. This is somebody I know that told me the story. To see that a safe had fallen through the roof onto where he was laying. And you're like, a safe? And I was like, well, why was a safe in your ceiling? His dad had wrangled a safe up into the attic and perched it between two of the rafters, and it had just, for some reason, moved loose and then fallen through the sheetrock on the top, right to where he was sitting. And I'm like, that's a bonkers story. And you hear a story like that, and you're like, okay, you don't even have to believe in God, but you're like, I don't know, the universe, something was protecting you. Something was happening. And I know all of you have stories like that where you're like, this thing happened. I don't know. It was weird. I can't quite explain it. I don't want to go all in and say it must have been God, but it was something. It was strange. I think all of you, if you were pressed, if we were to go around the room, all of you would have an experience that you would categorize as supernatural. You've had something. Maybe it was just like provision. Maybe you were like, man, checking account was down to like 10 cents. And then somebody was like, here's a bill. And you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then some money came out of nowhere. And maybe an aunt and an uncle called you up and said, hey, I just wanted to send you some money. And you're like, oh, how did you know? I don't know. I just wanted to. That kind of stuff happens. And we don't know what to do with it or how to categorize it. And we don't always talk about this stuff because it kind of sounds crazy. This is not the stuff that you would bring up on a first date or a job interview. Because people would put you in a category and they're like, oh, okay, that person is cuckoo. Because we do live in a culture that assumes the material and assumes the natural, and we believe it, but we wrestle with the supernatural. We're not sure where to put all that. It's just stuff that we tend to keep ourselves, and when we feel safe or comfortable, we trust somebody, then we'll share a story, and we'll often preface it. We'll be like, I don't know what this means, I don't know why this happened, but here's what happened. And it could be even less profound. It could just be that you had somebody who was in the hospital and you prayed for them to get better and they got better. And you're like, wow, okay, that's amazing. And I know the other thing happens too. You've had people in the hospital, you prayed for them to get better and they didn't get better. You're like, why was that? I don't know. But maybe you have these stories and maybe they're less tangible than my friend's particular story, but they're life-changing and they're hard to explain. You know what I mean? They're hard to share because you don't know. It's convincing to you, and it feels like it's going to be unbelievable to anybody else. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about. He's like, I got to tell you this story. This thing, it's super convincing to me. I had this experience, but I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds weird. Now, he goes back. If you go to the next slide, he does this thing where he goes, I know a man. And we know he's talking about himself. Why is he using third person to talk about himself? That's a weird, off-putting thing to do. But he's doing it because this is a technique called autobiographical distancing. So you're just trying not to say, the attention shouldn't be on me. I want the attention to be on God. And so he does it in third person. And we know he's talking about himself because if you get into verse 7, he switches back to first person. And then he talks about this weird thing called third heaven. Third heaven. Sounds super mystical and weird. What is that? Well, it is mystical and weird, but maybe not as strange as it might sound to us. The concept was that there were three heavens. And the first heaven was where the birds are flying around and the clouds. That was the first heaven. And the second heaven was where the satellites are and where space was and where the stars were and the moons are. And then the third heaven was where God is. And so when he's saying I was caught up into this experience of the supernatural and the mystical, he's saying I somehow experienced the presence of God. I wasn't in the clouds, I wasn't in the stars, I was somehow in the presence of God. It's pretty wild. But then he says this next thing that's really important. We want to anchor it in what he's just said, but look at what he says next. He says that this experience was so profound and so wild and so moving that it could be dangerous. Like someone who experiences too much fame too early in life. You see those people sometimes where you're like, they had too much influence, they had too much adulation, they were celebrated too much, and they didn't know what to do with it, and it's made them go crazy. We can think of celebrities right now that went to a place that wasn't healthy for them. And he says, this experience could have been bad for me. So he goes into the next part, and he says this, verse 7, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. More supernatural stuff. I know, strange. Verse 8, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. Oh, what is this? All right, we just went from this really high, this awesome, amazing, supernatural, super cool experience to this like not so good experience. Now I can relate much more to this one, a difficult, hard thing that in my life that I would love God to take away, and for some reason he doesn't. Now, let's do some active listening on this passage, okay? So we're thinking through this verse, active listening. Paul, and when you're active listening, you repeat back in your own words what you hear the person saying. Paul, I hear you saying that to prevent a negative outcome, which is conceit, from this experience going to your head, that you were gifted a negative experience. In order for this bad thing, to avoid this bad thing in your life, you were given a bad thing. In order to produce something good, you were gifted something bad. Let's sit with that just for a second, because this does not compute. In order to experience something good, your own good, God gifted you something negative. That's enough right there, right? That's one we could sit and we could think about for a while, and we could interpret the experiences of our own lives through that filter and say, oh, wait a second. All those things that I've gone through that I've just looked at as terrible and awful and I don't want to have anything to do with them, there was a potential for them to be producing something good in me? Boy, think about your life experiences. Anybody here ever had anything go wrong in their life? Okay, Travis. Yeah, Travis really has. God cursed him with a roommate in college. That was really, it's hard. Hard times. I was that roommate, by the way, if you don't know. It's a long-standing joke. There's this amazing story. There's several amazing stories I could go to, but one that just popped into mind. Well, there's two that popped into my mind, but I'm going to tell you one. There's a guy in the Old Testament named Joseph, and he was sold into slavery by his brothers. That is some sibling rivalry on another level. I probably would have done it in the right circumstances myself. I would have sold my sisters into slavery if there had been the opportunity. But I mean, that is some serious business. And that was actually the merciful option. One of the brothers was like, let's just kill him. And another brother was like, no, we can't go that far. Let's just commit him to a life of servitude. It's pretty rough. So years pass, and if you know the story, God, manipulates circumstances to the point that not only is he not a slave, he's like in charge of this country, and they've got all these stockpiles of resources, and his brothers, not knowing that he's in charge of the country, come crawling to him begging for help. Now, he knows it's him. His brothers do not know it's him, and there's this whole interesting intrigue thing going on. And finally, Joseph reveals, he's like, ta-da, it's me all along, it's Joseph. And the brothers are like, uh-oh, we're in trouble now, because this guy, he's going to kill us. He's going to murder us. He's going to put us into slavery. And Joseph says this profound thing. It's in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. He says this profound truth. He says that you intended evil, God intended good. The same event, the same circumstance. You meant it for evil. You wanted to harm me, but God had a plan that involved that. Pretty wild. So what is this thorn in this story? What is this thorn? It's probably something that was not life-threatening, something that he could live with, but it was certainly attention-getting. You ever had a situation like that? Even something small, like, you get a sliver in your finger, splinter. Anyway, you get one of those in your finger, and it's like it's not like you got to get it out, right? It's not life-threatening, but it takes all your focus. My daughter Avery, who just graduated from college, was helping her high school. That's correct, high school. Thank you. This is live in the moment editing. That's very good. I'm very good to have the fact checkers. All of you did it too. That was pretty amazing. All at once. My daughter Avery, who at some point in the future, Lord willing, will graduate from college, just graduated from high school, was helping at her school's play. She was helping make costumes. It was Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and she was making the blankets that the grandparents slept under. And in the process of putting together these blankets in the sewing machine, she sewed right through her index finger. Gross. Okay, I got a picture I'm going to show you. Just kidding, I don't have a picture. You guys, some of you are like, yes, I'm not going to be able to pay attention until you see it. I don't like seeing that kind of stuff. It super duper grosses me out. I cannot show it to you. And some of you might throw up or pass out, so I don't want to do that. But she this is gross enough just to tell it. She drove a needle through the tip of her finger. Now, do you think she was just like, bummer, I'm just going to go on with my life? No. It wasn't life-threatening, but everything now centered around dealing with that thorn in her literal flesh. It was attention-getting. And what Paul is saying is there's something like that. He doesn't tell us what it is. And I actually am grateful that he doesn't tell us what it is, because we don't know if it was physical. We don't know if it was mental. We don't know if it was emotional. We don't know if it was relational. And I think that's good. I think that's by design, because it means that we can take our own pain and our own suffering and understand this passage through that lens. We don't have to say, well, what Paul dealt with was worse than what I dealt with, so his advice doesn't apply to me. And we don't also have to say, well, what Paul dealt with isn't anything like what I'm dealing with, so his advice doesn't apply to me. Do you know how we do that? Have you ever noticed how we do that, we humans? We love to compare suffering. We love to do it. Parents do it. Oh, you think you had it hard, right? All I got for Christmas was rocks. It snowed year-round when I was a kid, right? We love to do that. Or if somebody tells a story of something hard that they went through, our natural instinct isn't to say, oh, I'm so sorry, that sounds really hard, that's really tough. That's what a therapist would do. What we like to do is tell them a story that was even harder from our own life and our own experience. And we like to one-up one another. And it's just not, it doesn't matter. And it's very important that we understand that there's this blank space that Paul's talking about that we can insert our own pain and our own suffering into, and we can understand how to manage this, how to think about this, but we don't have to worry about what somebody else is going through. Because this is the thing about pain and suffering. It's notoriously subjective. Michael Jordan famously played Game 5 of the NBA Finals with food poisoning. If you've watched The Last Dance, I knew exactly who was going to win all those games, and I'm still like on the edge of my seat. Who's going to win? And they talked about this particular instance. Like Michael Jordan, one of the greatest basketball players ever. He had a pizza delivered to his hotel room. He was the only person on the team that ate it, and the next day he was super, super sick. They called it the flu game, but later they think it was actually food poisoning, and maybe somebody did it intentionally. It's a whole conspiracy theory. It's pretty interesting. This picture here is him nearly collapsing and being held up by his teammate, Scottie Pippen, because he's just weak and he is tired. Now, most of us, if we had food poisoning or we had the flu, we would go to bed. We would not play professional sports in those circumstances. He played 44 minutes, scored 38 points. Most of us would have been in bed. So he was able to handle suffering differently than somebody else. And it just doesn't matter. I'm impressed. This is just me confessing more than you want to hear. I'm impressed when people literally do not care about what other people think. I don't have the ability, the switch. I can't turn that off. I care about what people think. And so if you really want to ruin my day, tell me something negative you think about me, and I will just obsess about that. I'm giving you all that power over me. Some people thrive under stress. Other people crumble. And the question isn't, can we tough something out? But the question is, we should ask ourselves as we're thinking through, what are the difficulties in life that I need to work through in light of what Paul is saying, is what would make me plead to God for relief? Not I could tough that out. They're just being wimps. What would make me plead to God for relief? So you fill in the blank there. And then we understand, and we go on, the next thing he talks about, and Paul offers this incredible perspective on suffering. And I've told you this before. We're in part 3 of this series on suffering. You are going to suffer. You're going to suffer. You may as well learn how to suffer well. You can complain, or you can learn how to suffer well. And Paul's going to teach us how to suffer well. So this is what he says. This is the rest of that passage, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But he said to me, this is God, and I would love to know, how did God communicate to Paul? It just doesn't say. Was it God's audible voice? Was it a sensation or a feeling? Was it wise counsel from a smart person in Paul's life? We just don't know. However this happened, God communicated this profound truth to Paul. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul says, this is his conclusion. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I personally would much prefer to experience God through the supernatural, positive experiences in life. That's how, if God were to ask me, that would be great. God, I would like to hear your voice. I would like to have mountaintop experiences. I would like to be blessed. I would just like to have all good things. I would like to experience you through the good. But Paul is saying something profound, that suffering, pain, and weakness are also a chance to experience God. Simone Biles famously pulled out of Olympic events in 2001. It was the catch-up Summer Olympics from 2000. And she pulled out for a couple reasons, but one of the cited reasons was mental health concerns. You remember this? You guys remember when this happened? It was shocking. When she did it, it was sort of like a national Rorschach test in the sense that it revealed more about people's response, revealed more about them than it did about her. So there were people who were applauding her, and there were people who were criticizing her. And I imagine it's a tough decision. But it really revealed, like there were some people, you can tell they were saying, well, in my day, or I would never have pulled out of the Olympics. And you're just like, until you can just jump 20 feet in the air and do a million flips all at the same time, I don't know that we should criticize, or unless you've been on the international spotlight in the Olympics, I just don't know that we should have much of a say. But one commentator in particular said this, and I just thought this was so funny. He said, what if Michael Jordan quit basketball at the height of his career in athletic ability? He was really upset at her. And somebody responded, dude, Michael Jordan literally quit at the height of his career in athletic ability. Come on, man. He literally walked away from basketball to play baseball not very well. At 30. Some people said giving up showed strength. Other people said giving up showed weakness. She won gold in the individuals in 2024, so I guess it all worked out okay. But I think that people's reaction to her highlighted this tricky relationship between weakness and resilience, because the older generation they want to instill resilience in the younger generation. But what they don't recognize is that the younger generation often has resilience in ways that the older generation does not. The older generation has resilience because we didn't have smartphones when I was a kid. We went outside and we played. Well, the younger generation is having to navigate different challenges and a different life and a different world. And sometimes we just need to acknowledge that some things are harder if other things are easier. It's just not worth comparing. But we do live in this culture that does not celebrate at all weakness. You've seen all these, right? Pain is just weakness leaving your body, right? No, sometimes pain is just pain. This children's book, Winners Never Quit. I guess technically, if you're talking about winning a soccer game, yes, but you know what? Sometimes winners do walk away from Olympics and then come back and win 3 years later. Second place is the first loser. This exists in our culture, right? You tough it out. I actually literally, I've told you guys many times that I love playing basketball. I played basketball with a guy who literally had a fractured leg. And I'm like, what? You should be at the hospital. And he's like, no, if I go to the hospital, they're just going to break it more so that they can set it. And I'm like, maybe they should do that. Because what if it happens here? I don't want to be dealing with that. My favorite T-shirt, I accidentally came across this, but I wanted to share it with you because it was so funny. This T-shirt, I think it means never quit, do your best. But the way I read it was never do your best, quit. So I thought this T-shirt was great. It really captured the zeitgeist of the moment. So we've got these cultural norms that we're thinking through and we have a hard time with. We have gender norms. I know it's stereotypical, but men are statistically less likely to seek therapy or medical help, right? We just are. Men also die a lot sooner than women, and there's probably a correlation, but we're praised for playing through the pain and toughing it out. We don't live in a culture that says, hey, your weakness is something to be paid attention to and dealt with. And then I've already mentioned this, but there's generational differences. And these, to me, are funny, too, in some ways, because every generation does this, right? As I get older, I'm like, these kids. And it happened to me when I was younger. But, it's just in my day, you got a full-time job when you were 14. You didn't talk about your feelings. Nobody had mental illness, right? People say that, and you're like, I don't know. If you met Uncle Carl, he lived in Grandma's basement for a long time, and we stopped inviting him to the family reunion, and I don't know. I think maybe we just didn't talk about mental illness back in the day. Paul himself didn't appreciate this weakness that he was subject to. Maybe he had something similar to a modern American mentality about weakness, because he pleaded for this thorn to be removed. But God intervenes and says, nope, not going to do that, but here's what I'm going to do, is to help you understand that the path to actual strength is weakness. Because it forces you to recognize your own limitations. And in our case, it forces us to rely on God. Our weakness can push us to the most important things in life. And let me wrap up by saying Paul highlights two, and I just want you to see these. These are valuable. Number one is our weakness tethers us to God's grace. Our weakness tethers us to God's grace. I saw one of those viral videos a few weeks ago, and it was this guy who was going bungee jumping, and they had put on the one strap, but they had another safety harness that they were going to attach, and then they were going to go over all the details of, like, here's how you do it. And so they opened up the door to the ledge where he was going to jump off, and he was supposed to go stand on the ledge, and then they were going to give him the rest of the spiel. And he just walks out, and he just kind of sits and falls off. He just goes. And the workers, like, scream. Fortunately, he's still got one harness on. He's going to be okay. But they're like, you were not ready to go over the ledge, my friend. And this guy doing that, and he was fine. But this guy doing that, that's not bravery, right? That's stupidity. To do something, maybe to bungee jump in general, but certainly to do something without being prepared, it's not brave, it's dumb. Because we understand that the human body isn't supposed to be falling off of stuff. So if we are going to do that, let's double, triple, quadruple check everything, right? It's not brave. Listen, this is what I want you to hear. You are not brave or tough when you ignore your weaknesses. You're not brave when you ignore your weaknesses. You're not brave because you jumped off the bungee thing without being fully harnessed in. Paul says when we are aware of our weaknesses, then we are forced to double, triple check, quadruple check our connection to grace. There's a misunderstanding that exists in the Christian ether. Have you heard something like this? God will never give you more than you can handle. Have you ever heard that? It just kind of exists. God will never give you more than you can handle. God will allow more than you can handle in your life all the time. In fact, every single one of you have been in situations that were more than you could handle. The Bible doesn't teach that God will never give you more than you can handle. The Bible teaches when you're in a situation that's more than you can handle, then you seek God and you allow Him to handle it. But He doesn't say, oh, I'm never going to put you in a situation that's over your head. Oh, all the time you're going to be in situations that are over your head. If you don't feel over your head parenting or in marriage or in life in general, then you're probably just not thinking of it correctly. You are going to be in situations that are incredibly difficult, incredibly hard. It's a misinterpretation of 1 Corinthians 10:13, where God said, I will not put you in a situation that there is no way out of in terms of temptation. You will never have to sin in order to do what God's wanting you to do. That's what He's talking about. In fact, 2 Corinthians, earlier in the book, Paul writes, we were under great pressure, he writes. We were far beyond our ability to endure. Sounds like he was in over his head. We despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Suffering, weakness reminds us that we never grow beyond grace. The second thing, Paul says, our weakness creates space for God's power. Our weakness creates space for God's power. I know you probably don't care about the process of preaching, but I spend a lot of time preparing sermons. I think I spend too much time preparing sermons because I'm always like, well, I don't want to say that wrong. I don't want to say my daughter graduated from college when she actually graduated from high school. That would be super embarrassing. I don't want to say the Greek word wrong. I don't want to misexplain something. I don't want anybody to have to come up to me after the service and say, well, you did this wrong. I've had that happen, and not just here, but other places where you got it wrong. You didn't understand this. You didn't fully understand it. So I spend a ton of time preparing, and so sometimes I'll spend so much time just making sure that everything is perfectly arranged and thought through, and I'll be like, okay, all right, I figured it all out. I got it. This is a home run. And then I preach, and people fall asleep. And they leave midway through, and they're bored, and they're yawning. The very best I can do is okay. And then there are other times where life has thrown so much at me during the week, and I just like, God, I'm barely keeping my head above water. I wrote down some thoughts I thought you were telling me to speak, and I hope that's okay. And y'all get done, people will be like, that's the best sermon ever. You've never preached better. And I'm like, when I try to do it on my own, I don't get those compliments. When I let God work, I do see God working. Because our best isn't going to be enough. Our strength can actually crowd God out. And it's awful. And I know you don't care about the process of preaching preparation, but there's been times where I've worked so hard to get it just right, and then I'll get done with all my preparation, the last, period on the last sentence that I want to say, and I'll realize at no point in the process did I stop and ask God to bless what I was thinking and saying and doing and preparing. And that's a huge miss. It's a huge miss. I love the idea that when we accomplish something by faith, and it can be anything. It can be anything, fill in the blank of suffering in your life. It can be overcoming temptation. It can be raising a family. It can be turning our lives around. I think this is the response people should have. I think they should look at us and say, wow, it doesn't make sense how you did that. I think people should look at our kids and be like, how did you raise such great kids? And be like, I don't know, God. I think people should look at us and say, how did you get your life turned around? Like, man, it was God. Because I think if they look at us and they say, yeah, you're a tough person. I can see how you figured it out. You're smart. The attention is on the wrong person. The attention is on the wrong being. So the question is, what do we miss out? What do we miss out on if we crowd God out of working in our lives? Paul wraps up by saying this, and we're going to finish here. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses. Let me say this as we close. Weakness testimonies, you know what testimonies are? That's when somebody shares a truth about God and life with you. Weakness testimonies are the best testimonies. I love it. I love it when I've had maybe a tough interaction with my kids, all my wonderful angels who never mess up. I love it when I've had a tough interaction with my kids, and then I'm talking with another parent who has this amazing kid, and they're like, you know what? We just had a tough interaction with our kid. I'm like, I'm so glad to hear that, because I thought that you were perfect, and I'm glad to hear that you're not perfect. That gives me hope. Weakness testimonies are the most powerful testimonies. Some people are like, you look at somebody who has an amazing marriage, and you're just like, how did they do it? How did they figure it out? How did they get it all together? And then they tell you something like, yeah, this has been a really rough patch. We just had a pretty good argument on the way to church this morning. And you're like, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm glad that it's not just me, because you think God brought us through, then there's hope. But when we pretend that it's all good all the time, it's not relatable, and it's not real, and it doesn't leave any room for God's grace. We minister from our weaknesses, not our strengths. I'm going to ask the praise team to come up as we wrap up this morning. I just want to leave you with this. You can go ahead and stand as the praise team comes up here. I want to leave you with this idea, because this is a challenge a lot of us have. A lot of you have friends, family, people that you want to have some spiritual interaction with. You want to have some influence with. Maybe there's someone you want to bring to church, but you feel like, I don't know enough. I don't know the right things to say. I don't know what to tell them. And I'm telling you, Paul's teaching us that you don't need to know enough. You don't need to have the right things to say because the power isn't in you. You acknowledge those weaknesses and you let God work through you.